We are live. Hello and greetings. Welcome to another Educator Innovator Hangout on Air. It's December 9th, 2015, and today we are really excited to welcome a group of colleagues who are fostering conversations about inquiry and the role of building schools as learning communities. This is the first in a two-part series on this topic, or these topics, I suppose. This week we're going to focus on the ways educators are thinking together about inquiry and connected practice. And then next Wednesday we'll come back and move the conversation a bit more closely into the classroom itself and connect with students, engage with these practices alongside their teachers. And these conversations are inspired by a few things. Here, they are both historic conversations as well as emerging conversations. So here at Ed Innovator, they're the perfect mix to bring. There's also a organization that Diana runs called Inquiry Schools that's doing a range of interesting work around the country. And then more recently, a book was just published called Building School 2.0, How to Create the Schools That We Need by Chris Lehmann here and Zach Chase. So the series is also being co-streamed at connectedlearning.tv, which is at connectedlearning.tv. And we send special thanks to them for their support to make this happen. I'm your host, by the way. I'm Christina Cantrill, the Associate Director of National Programs at the National Writing Project. I'm based here in Philadelphia and connecting to you live from my living room. So thanks everybody for coming today. I wanted to let our guests just introduce themselves briefly, and starting from screen left, or my screen left, I suppose. So Adina, maybe you could come on and give your name, where you are, and then maybe a sense of why you're here today.
Sure. So again, my name is Adina Sullivan, and I'm a K-12 Educational Technology Coordinator for San Marcos Unified School District, which is just north of San Diego here in California. And we have been working with inquiry. This is we started working with it in 2011 and with teachers in 2012 on using inquiry as the basis for our district one-to-one program.
Great, thank you. Chris, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Chris Lehmann. I'm the founding principal of Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia and the head of innovation for the school district of Philadelphia and chair of the board of inquiry schools, and along which Diana does all of the heavy lifting on. For me, SLA, the school that we started now, we're actually open two and are about to open our third, is built fully around the idea of inquiry. Our core values are inquiry, research, collaboration, presentation, reflection. And the fascinating things is, after 10 years of starting a school and running a school that is based on the idea of inquiry, I actually believe even more deeply in the idea that learning is about the questions we ask, and it turns out probably life is too. So this is kind of the sort of overarching passion of my life, is figuring out how we do this better.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Diana.
And Diana Laufenberg, I am joining you from next door to Adina, as I'm working with her district right now on some inquiry work. I am the executive director of Inquiry Schools, former classroom teacher for 16 years, and have been for the last 3.5 years doing a whole range of projects that really are based in inquiry at its core, but it stems from new school development, which Chris referenced a little bit, as well as school transformation work, which is a different kind of lifting in the realm of inquiry systems and structures, and then also more professional development around what does it look like in the classroom, and how do you approach that from the classroom level. And that's the work that I'm doing with Adina this week in San Marcos.
Great, thank you, and thanks for letting us come into your spaces as everybody's actively working and being together, and allowing us this view into the work that you're doing together, so thanks. Just quickly, for those of you who might be watching this Hangout live, we want to encourage you to post any thoughts or ideas or questions you might have via the Q&A feature that's on Google. But you can also tweet to the hashtag #ConnectedLearning, and you can also follow conversations on Twitter there. So we encourage you to do that. And we're going to start with some discussion questions, but then really happy to bring in conversations that might be happening on Twitter or via the Q&A feature. So please feel free to ask any questions, and we'll try to pick them up in our conversation. So, okay, well, let's see. To get us started here, I wanted to sort of throw out a question to the whole group. Let me get my question here. You know, and just sort of hear how you all respond to this. So in the description for this webinar or this conversation, we mentioned that you all are working on building schools that are, quote, in and of our time, for the children, unquote. And this is a beautiful vision and a beautiful idea, and I was wondering if you could give us a sense of what this looks like in your experience, maybe even sort of what it feels like and sounds like. You know, what is your experience of this work? Whoever wants to go first?
I guess, I mean, I wrote those, so I guess I should say those. I should start. So, you know, I mean, there's so many places to take that. I think fundamentally, you know, I think that every student has the right to ask the question, why do I need to know this? I think that we should have schools that reflect the world the kids live in today. So it shouldn't be special or weird that they have a piece of technology in their hands. We should stop talking about using technology as doing a technology project, but rather we should start to make classrooms authentic places where the way we live our lives is reflected in the way that we teach and learn, right? You know, the idea that you know, we write differently, shop differently, vote differently, and yet school looks the same in so many places just strikes me as really weird, right? I mean, you know, like, how many of us are gonna, you know, now consume media differently, and yet Netflix is blocked in most districts? As an example, right? Like when we would be bringing in those medias, we treat text as the only way we consume information in a lot of schools, and yet to be, you know, to not be multimodal in the way that we both consume and produce information these days is to not be fully literate. And so, you know, like, which dovetails nicely with the work that digital is, you know, like, and all the rest of it. But that's just one example, right? But just more than that, we should ask kids to solve complex problems in their communities. We should ask them to weigh in on what matters. We should ask them to build solutions for the problems they see around them in their world, both locally and then sort of larger than that. And now I'll shut up and let other people talk.
Adina, why don't you jump in? Mike, Adina.
Unmute.
There you go.
So, so I come at this from a slightly different place than where Chris is coming from in a little bit of a way, in that Chris is looking at building schools from the ground up, and we are really looking at how do you take an institution that exists, a district that exists and does well in the old way, and say, and now we need to make a change, and the reasons for that change. So we really had to look at what does that mean, why are we doing this, and helping folks to see that we really need to change the way that students experience school, that they're no longer doing school, they're no longer doing the game of school, but they're actually learning and in meaningful ways, and understand what they're doing and why, and the connection it has to themselves and to the larger world now and in their futures. And that's where we are now working to take students and teachers, because most teachers haven't experienced this either, and helping them to be really successful in an environment that's really, really new for them.
And then I'll jump in. So I have the interesting job of bridging both of the spaces that Adina and Chris speak of, because I am part of New School Projects, but I'm also knee-deep in some really dynamic school transformation projects as well. And the thing that occurs to me over and over and over again is that we have it in our capacity to make school much more student-centered, and our systems and structures side of things really needs to start bending toward the students instead of the systems and structures bending just towards the adults in the system, and really starting to untangle what that means when you build it from the base up. How do you do that? But also, how do you transition from the traditional to something that's a little less adult-centered and something that's much more student-centered? And so that's kind of where that lives for me as well.
Great. I think that's a great segue. I'm hearing an echo. I'm sorry. Thanks, Diana. Maybe you could keep going a little bit and talk about the role of inquiry in that, like, leaning towards work that you describe. I know that's what you do at Inquiry Schools, so maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
So one of the big things that the process of inquiry is the process of asking questions and unending amounts of questions, and that everything is kind of in the realm of potential to be questioned. Traditional systems don't always love that process. Part of my role in a lot of the districts that I've been in is to say the uncomfortable thing or ask the question that nobody that has to also shop at the same grocery store would ask inside that system, because it's something that is somebody else's sacred moment there of we don't touch the bus schedule, or we don't mess with lunch, or the master schedule is something that will never change. You know, people really live inside these spaces where they don't question some of their basic structural systems that then yield really uninteresting spaces for kids and teachers to work in. And it really is a matter of walking through a process with people to say, you know, what is going well, where are you struggling, why did you make that decision, what is motivating that particular set of choices, have you considered evaluating X, Y, or Z, and really starting to ask deep and meaningful questions about some of the systems and structures. Because the way that most schools have ended up there is just through pattern and habit, and some of them have been largely unexamined for decades. And so the work becomes being someone who can start modeling the process of how to ask those kind of big, bold questions about your own systems and structures that then can support the classroom side of things. Because one of the most frustrating things that I watch large districts do is ask their teachers to embrace something like inquiry, but they themselves are not willing to embrace the process. And then you get this pretty serious tension between what the classroom is being asked versus what the system is doing to bend toward it.
That's great. It's really interesting to take this systems approach. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, and I just want to hop in, because this is the thing that Diana and I really both try to do all of the time, and it is this idea that the way to inquiry is through inquiry, right? And there's a chapter in the book called Be One School, and what that idea, one of those sort of core pieces of that is that, like, if we want kids to learn through inquiry, we've got to let adults learn through inquiry. You can't lecture this stuff. You can't mandate this stuff. And the other really amazing thing about when you do that is, and as we look as Inquiry Schools tries to both build new schools, not only in Philadelphia but in other places, but also sort of work on school transformation, is even with these core values, even if your core values are the same, even if these things are even if there are some common practices, the answers you come up with differ from school to school to school, which is really powerful because you are engaging people in answering. Like, if the thing that that Diana and I have done over time is come up with some really powerful questions that we think people can ask. Number one, those are just the starter questions, because by asking questions you generate more questions. But the cool thing is you generate unique answers, and that's what prevents this from being from just being a black box, right? That's what creates empowerment. That's what creates engagement. That's what creates ownership in the process, and that's what means that every school will be the best version of itself where it is, not just saying we want 100 schools that look exactly like SLA all over the country, right? And that notion is really important to what we're talking about.
Great. And what I'm struck by, and Adina, I'm wondering if we could sort of move to you, actually, because I was thinking about the role of the adults, and you're talking about all the adults, like there's the sort of the system of adults and students asking these questions and context-specific questions, and that, and Adina, can you talk a little bit about what that process has been like in your context, and sort of how this sort of a systems approach impacts teacher learning?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate that when my district decided to go this way, we did it in a way that I think was very thoughtful. Mm-hmm. And we really came at it from the perspective of the district wanting, the district, them, upper management, board, what have you, saying we would like to put more technology in our schools. And in looking at that, we did a lot of study, and it was really inquiry-based study, and we realized, you know what, you cannot just put technology in schools. Bright, shiny doesn't fix it. Bright, shiny doesn't give you engagement. It gives you interest for a little while, but not true engagement and student understanding. It doesn't make a significant impact. So what do we have to do? We need to change the way we teach. And we included members from the board of directors, from superintendent, different curriculum directors, principals, teachers, community members, universities, parents, and really had this discussion about what would this look like and what makes the most sense, asking some of those questions of ourselves and really thinking it through and processing it and researching it and studying and asking all those questions to come up with the fact that we wanted to use inquiry as the way we help teachers do a better job of using technology in the classroom. And so we brought that in and brought in really, really slowly. 2011 wasn't a really good time for budgets, at least not in California. I don't think anywhere else. So we had to start it very small and choose people very, very carefully to be involved, choose schools carefully based on whether leadership was ready for it and willing to kind of take this risk, because this is a risk. When you are in a system that does well through the traditional measures and you ask people to change what they are doing, that's difficult. That's a risk folks do not take lightly. Educators tend to be habit-driven. We've done what we have done, and if what you've done works, then why would I change that? So really helping folks to understand that this is what a difference this makes for students, and we brought folks in for a 2-year program. They had to apply the first couple of years to say that they wanted to be involved and wanted to commit to this, and really work on inquiry first and then the connection to technology second. The inquiry has to be first. So now we are, we went from 40 teachers the first year. We're now up to 223 teachers. We've got 9 groups running right now. But out of 1,000 teachers, that's still only a small dent. But I think it's really important to build that slowly and build your capacity, because what we've seen over time is we went from our first group of teachers who really were afraid to make the change and that it wouldn't be accepted by the students, by the parents, by their administrators, to people asking us, can I be involved? And principals saying, yes, can I add more teachers to this? So now it's become a normal part of what we do because we built it slowly and didn't make it a new district mandate. Here's what we're all going to do. You will all do it now. This is the way we're going to, this is the way it's all going to work now. It had to come with everybody discussing it together and then building capacity slowly so that you get more buy-in.
I remember this from the book too, so just to, because Chris mentioned the book, and I wanted to, this idea that evolution is actually a really important part of change. So there's the book itself. I only have it on Kindle, so I can't even look it up right now. But I'm just wondering if Chris or Diana want to speak to that, just in, or Chris, he's got the book right there, because that's what I remember reading in the book, that there is, this idea of change is one thing, but then how do you actually make change happen in a way that's healthy for a community and supportive of the community, and ultimately where you can really see the benefits for the students, which is what Adina said really is the sort of pivot point, right? But,
Diana will say this better than I will, but I'll start. We should, hit Clayton Christensen up the side of the head with a brick or something. Disruptive innovation is bad for children. Right? Disruption is not what you want kids to go through. And it's also not what you want teachers to go through, and it fundamentally doesn't, like, cell phones aren't schools, right? So we can sit there and say, like, oh, we disrupted, whatever, and now we have smartphones and everything's better, and yay. But, like, when you're dealing with people in a caring profession, when you're dealing with people who work with children, you're dealing with children, you don't want to be like, let's change really hard, and who cares if it's painful and bad, we'll get to the other side, it'll be great, because kids are only in 3rd grade once, and teachers spend their lives, being really thoughtful about their work. So the idea of evolutionary change, the idea of helping people get there, the idea that we're going to do this in a way that brings people along instead of leaves them behind to sort of, and I did that by accident, but like, is really important, because people want to do, I really do believe that the overwhelming majority of teachers want to do right by their children and do this in a thoughtful, important way. I believe the overwhelming majority of kids want an education that is empowering and authentic and meaningful to them. And if we just say what we did before sucked and now we're going to do something different and who cares about how the pain points as we go through it, you're not respecting the lives that people are living in these institutions, students and teachers. And we have to do that. We don't have the luxury, or we don't have the right to disrupt other people's lives in ways that end up doing harm to children and adults.
And I can jump in there, Christina, just to piggyback on that taking all of that into account and then figuring out where to go from there and how to pull off a kind of a humane process of evolution, for me, lives inside of this idea that we need to build flexible systems and build flexible spaces where, and it brings back in that inquiry where you never stop asking those questions and you never stop, what's your best idea and how do you keep poking at it to make sure that you are definitely being the best kind of critical analyzer of your own ideas and really continuing to ask those questions. But then that you're building a road and not turning on a light switch. It's a lot of people really want something that's easy. Disruption is almost easier because you can just stop and start. Actually having a system flow from who they are to who they want to be, their aspirational mission statement, their aspirational goals, is tricky and tough, and finding that space between and using nuance and relevance for a particular community around their issues, that is tough space to navigate. And when you do it thoughtfully and intentionally, it is change that digs in for the long haul. It is change for the long range. And it's not something that just is done in 3 years because the superintendent changes out. And I know, Adina can definitely jump in with some more ideas about what that looks like on the student side as well.
Yeah, the student side has been really interesting for us because we have definitely, we pulled in a third party the first year that we started the program to really look at how this impacted teachers and what the effects really were and how they were really feeling about it and how it impacted students. And we were surprised on both sides of it. And what we found for students when we did surveys of students who participated in the program and those who did not, there were some pretty significant differences. And one of those, one of the ones I think is most important is that students felt that the learning was really designed for them, that it was truly personalized. We talk a lot about personalized learning and computer programs that'll personalize the learning and all this kind of good stuff. But what these teachers were doing was basic inquiry, and really was basic that first year. But the students, because they had some voice in what was happening, because it was connected to them in some way, no matter how minor, and they had some say also in what they created, how they researched it, that whole process, they felt that the learning was really meant for them. They felt truly that it was personalized. They also talked about the fact that they felt instruction was more cross-curricular, and that's something we didn't specifically address with teachers because we didn't think it was going to go well if we tried to make that a key piece of what we wanted them to do. We wanted it to happen but didn't want to push it, and students felt that it was happening. It became a natural part of what teachers did, especially at the beginning in the elementary grades, where people stopped teaching, okay, now we're done with reading, now we're going to do science. Now we're going to do math. They started to connect things better, and the students were noticing that, and it was making an impact. They talked about the fact that they were more active learners and not just passive. And it should be an obvious, and yet it's not. It isn't. We're just really used to, I am the teacher, I stand here, I give you information, you will receive the information, you will give it back to my test, we will go to the next unit, life will be good. I will be on my timeline, that's great. And the teachers started to change the way they did that, and students really reacted well to it, and felt like they were active learners, really participating in the process and an important piece of the process, and not just passively doing what they were asked to do because the teacher asked them to do it. And those things are huge, and that was year one. That's continued to grow as we moved to where now we have teachers who they're with us today for our session, and they, even before they came to be a formal part of the program, they were already starting to do some of this work. They were seeing others do a little bit of it. They took it on and really started doing some of this stuff with students, and now it's really building a movement even outside of our specific program. And so that's a huge accomplishment. What those students are getting now is significantly different than what they were getting 4 years ago.
Wow, that's powerful. Really important to hear. So thank you for sharing that. And I feel like, it would be lovely to continue to hear how that evolves over time. I'm struck by a couple of things, and I don't, we can, Chris and Diana, you can jump in here. I guess that, this piece about cross-curricular, I think, is fascinating, actually. Like the ways that, again, is that about the inquiry? Like, would you say like that's what opens up those spaces for cross-curricular work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it would.
Despite everybody's best intentions to stay or whatever.
The funny thing is this, and it's one of the things, like, there's still a space for folks to plan interdisciplinary projects, right? Like where the English teacher and the history teacher get together and plan a project together. But what actually starts to kind of happen when in an inquiry-based space, when you create the space and when you use some other tools like essential questions and grade-wide themes and all the rest of the other pieces of the puzzle, is classes become lenses, not silos, which is awesome. And that's when when you attack a question through a scientific lens, it doesn't mean you're always doing, it means that you're bringing in those other questions, right? Like, what are the social implications of this science, of this project I'm doing? What are the historical implications of it? Like, what were the things? And so classes become lenses by which we attack questions and problems, not silos of information. And that's a fundamental shift in thinking about why we take the classes we take.
And then I was just going to jump in with an example of that, and I'll reference Zach, who wasn't able to join us today. But when Zach and I worked at SLA as teachers, it was as interdisciplinary connected teachers. He was the ELA side and I was the social studies side, and we found some incredibly powerful ways to ask really large umbrella style questions that bridge the space between our subjects, that the students started to see all of this space that they didn't always see before, that was ripe for the cross-disciplinary, the interdisciplinary work. One of my seniors once, he was in government and in a science class and in a senior reading class, and he had done some research in his English class, which then led to his choice for a project in science, which then became his lobbying project in government. Like, he started to see the connection between that his learning, and when given the opportunity to ask authentic and real questions, that he was the driver of how he moved through those concepts. And he just kept finding more and more connections. And for Lehmann's benefit, that was Rashawn. He did a really interesting set of connections around that. And Zach and I worked very intently on trying to be thoughtful in the way that we did that work.
The cool thing, of course, is that Rashawn is now doing that writ large in his life, acting as a connector and building these spaces where the learning that he did at SLA, now he's doing the stuff with Watson University, he's doing all the stuff with connections and building these bridges across folks who don't usually talk to one another, and he will speak very powerfully about how working at SLA and working as a student with folks like Diana and Zach and all the rest of it informed why he now thinks the way he does and why he sort of makes these connections the way that he does in his life, which is just kind of a neat thing.
And thinking about you guys working as educators together, in the book, Chris, Zach, well, let me just say, the book is 95 theses, right? And then each thesis has a, what's the section called? I'm sorry.
From theory to practice.
From theory to practice, yeah. And so, you go through these 95, and each one has a from theory to practice piece to it, which is kind of cool and useful all in itself, I think. But we had pulled out this one chapter where you talk about say more but talk less. Right. And to me, that's really about like being a teacher, and so I'm wondering if you could sort of explain that and what that sort of looks like and what that's about.
Yeah, on a very fundamental way, don't fall in love with the sound of your own voice, right? And don't assume that just because you said it, kids learn it. So if we can have a greater impact if our voice is used to spur other voices, right? We're better teachers when we use our voice to ask the next question or to connect the dots between two student things and say, oh, that's interesting, I heard this, I heard that, it makes me wonder this, what do you think? And even just as the chapter says, like the difference between saying, explain that, which can be a little kind of in your face, versus say more, right? Which is really, awesome and powerful. So yeah, it's about learning, learning when to shut up in the classroom and make sure your voice is not the only one.
And Dina, did you want to follow up on that? Sort of like how you all have to what's the process of getting ready for doing that kind of thing?
Yeah, for folks who are like, yes, this sounds great. The book is fabulous, and I want to get into this, and what they're saying is so right on. And if you jump in without doing some careful work, you're in for a world of hurt. It will die a slow, painful death. So there's definitely some work that needs to happen, and one of those things that we definitely learned, wish we had known at the beginning, is that you really need to spend some time helping the adults involved build curiosity. As educators, most of us went through the traditional system of sit, listen, spit back, what have you, and so they're not good at it, and it's very difficult to do more and say less, and to get kids to ask questions and how to facilitate it the way all that works. If you're not capable of doing that, and I mean capable, but if you're not really in a place where you feel comfortable doing that, and we've had teachers who will do some of this stuff, and they're doing exactly the same thing that students will do, which is sit and wait for you to give them the answer, because we know the system that if you just wait long enough, somebody will tell you what the answer is supposed to be, and we can all move on. And so I think it's really, really important to build that curiosity and to help teachers find that within themselves and to be constructing that for themselves. But along with that, their administrators, those people that are going to be evaluating them and walking into their classrooms and seeing what's going on, if they're not truly doing that, they may have signed off and said, yeah, I think this is a great program and we should try this. But if they're not actively doing those kinds of things, they don't understand what they're seeing, and the teachers don't feel comfortable taking that risk. They don't believe them when they say, yes, I think this is great. They say, yeah, no, you're going to find a way to ding me. So I think we have to spend that time with teachers and with administrators building that curiosity piece and what that's all about before they will really understand how it works with students and be able to do that with students.
And I'll just quickly piggyback on that, because what she's referring to is such a deep, humane piece of this work, which is relationships around trust between different levels and different pieces of your system, and it's between students and teachers. Students need to have that same trust around inquiry. I used to push kids to do something a little new or different or kind of reach a little farther, and if they didn't trust that I wasn't coming with the D grade for them in that work, they wouldn't go into that space with me. Much the same, your teachers and your principals need to know that when they push into this work and take an academic risk, that there is not some kind of punitive mark coming for them, but rather that it is accepted as a part of the growth toward and the evolution toward something more or different than what has always been done.
Yeah, that's great. It feels why it's so key to have that systems approach. It's both intimate and, political and connected. So thank you. I wanted to take a moment and just say to people who might be watching live that we're happy to take questions or comments and bring some thoughts into the discussion if you have anything to contribute. We're about 15 minutes here. And I know I had a question I want to ask about from a sort of writing project connected learning lens. So let me just throw that out there and then invite other people to talk and discuss. I was sort of curious, like from a writing project stance, we're often thinking about writing, and then which is an act of creating, an act of making. And I was wondering about sort of the role of making and creating in the work of inquiry too. And I know that creating things is kind of a key idea at SLA, and I was wondering if Adina, if there's experience with that and sort of starting to like tap into what you're talking about with teachers, like what are some of the ways that we get more creative, that we start to think about ourselves as creators and producers of knowledge and engagers in knowledge, and not just always sort of consumers of other people's knowledge? So.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece, and I think part of that is giving teachers choice. It's sort of a sore point for a lot of folks in districts that you are told which PD you are going to go to, and that's the one you're going to go to. And there has to be a better balance between these are the ones we need everyone to have an understanding of as a district. And here are the things you could have a choice over what really interests you. So, for example, I am eyeballs deep in scheduling out a PD, a district-wide teacher PD, where teachers were given 30 different choices for what they could attend. And they're going to get to choose which things really interest them. What is it that they really want to know more about or want to get more information on or spend more time on? Or folks have said, yeah, I didn't know what that was, so I signed up for it because I thought, hey, I want to learn something new. Giving folks that opportunity to make choices for themselves, I think, is a really important first start. I think then as we're doing PD with them, doing it not in a sit and get fashion that the PD we do with teachers has to be more interactive. They need to be doing actual work during that time and constructing information themselves, where we do this, we we run it the same way, or we say, okay, what questions do you have? Here's the key guiding question. What questions do you have? Now let's actually find the information that goes with that, so you are constructing the knowledge, not me just telling it to you. So if we run our PD the same way we would want to have teachers work in the classroom, I think that's another step. And then it can work for teachers to say, okay, now I see what this maker movement is about. I see what hour of code is about. I can see where this all fits better because they've experienced it themselves.
You know, it's interesting. I'm struggling with this. You know, this is sort of how we do professional development as a district is one of the things that is now sort of I'm being asked to weigh in on as the innovation guy in Philadelphia. And how we create more opportunity for people to learn meaningfully is such a massive challenge in a district of, you know, 140,000 kids and 7,000 or 8,000 teachers or whatever we have in Philadelphia these days, 218 schools. And, you know, we are struggling with, we are challenged by understanding that we are trying to move from a district where, you know, the school office, you know, the central office sort of dictated to the field, and now we're starting to say, well, we want 440, that's the district office, to be more school-facing. And what I've been kind of coming to a realization about in my own head as I think about that stuff is school-facing doesn't mean inquiry-driven, right? School-facing doesn't mean everything that I think I want it to mean. School-facing means we're giving people what they need, or at least we think we are, but there can still be a very paternalistic aspect to school-facing. And one of what strikes me about what you're talking about is this idea, and it's flushing, you know, this gets maybe into a little bit more of the sort of politics behind what we believe and all the rest of it, but like it's flushing the paternalism out of the system, right? It's flushing the we know what you need and we're going to give it to you out of the system, and instead, again, funnily enough, asking better questions. What do you think you need? What are the things that we can do for you? What are the things that you can do for yourselves that we can facilitate, that we can enable and empower? And in a system as large as Philadelphia, that becomes a really big question, right? Like that becomes a fascinating question, you know, and one that as you try and solve system-wide, really challenging.
You know, I one of the things you said is really important. It's not it's more that one step to say, okay, let's let you decide what you actually need, and then find a way for you to choose that. But there's also providing the resources and the tools for teachers to be able to do their own learning. Teachers don't know where to go to do that work for themselves if they're interested in something. They don't know, you know, it's a very small group of educators, sort of those of us who are used to being the nerdy, geeky weirdos who are like, oh, let me go out and find this and connect with these people and learn this stuff, and, you know, the reason why we all know each other. But we need to be able to provide the systems and the resources and the tools for teachers to be able to do that on their own as well. And I think that's a huge part of it, that it's okay to be interested on your own, and here's how you do that. They need those tools.
And then I'll jump in. We had a question come in from Twitter from a woman named Helen DeWard, who's in California. And she asked, how do school leaders become lead learners and risk takers as models for teachers and build their own inquiries? And kind of what both Adina and Chris are talking about are absolute fascination in the traditional model with the idea of control and compliance as the basic overarching structure of how we've done things in the past. And as long as we continue to lean toward control and compliance instead of lean toward innovation and creativity, we're never going to get a different outcome. So how do these school leaders become the lead learners and risk takers as models? Is that they themselves have to examine their own kind of trending toward a control and compliance structure that they have with their own teachers, that their superiors have with them, and it's a very intentional process because you again bump into other people's touchy points around do what I said because I told you to do it. Instead of, I see how you're proceeding based on your interest, your needs, what you find as compelling to investigate. And when you start to do that kind of work, you have to have much more flexible boundary around the work. There cannot be a hard edge, because a hard edge means that you're in the telling and the mandating land of growth and learning, instead of the where is your, a phrase I like to use a lot is, where is your edge of possible? How do you kind of push into those kind of unknown spaces of, we haven't gone here before, but this is interesting, and how do we move in that? And so it's permission, trust, control, compliance, creativity, innovation. Those are really kind of some dichotomies to evaluate in your own system. Because if you want your teachers to be innovative and creative and be lead learners, you yourself have to find spaces to do that. You have to be the one finding the interesting ed reform articles. You have to be the one demonstrating different ways to lead professional development. You have to be the one who values their voice more than yours when you need to kick around some big ideas or ask for input. You have to be the one doing the same work that you want them to be doing, and just live it and breathe it.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was wondering if there's a lot of sometimes, innovation's one thing, and we're an educator innovator, so we do it too. Sometimes I'm like, wait, what do we mean, right? And then we start to talk about creativity, and there's a lot of sort of, potential baggage around that too. Like, people are nervous to be creative, but sometimes it actually just means creating something, or starting with like that act. I'm wondering if we can just like talk about that a little bit more. Like, how do we practice leaning towards innovation and creativity rather than control and compliance? And how do we encourage each other that way? Because sometimes it can feel kind of scary, right?
Yeah, it is, right? And Gary Steger talks about this a little bit, where he says, the only thing worse than a traditional classroom is a bad progressive one, right? Because the truth of this matter is, unfortunately, is that when this stuff goes off the rails, it doesn't do so quietly, right? It goes, we go way wrong when we go wrong, and so how you deal with that is challenging. And I think, Adina talked about this earlier. Some of the toughest places to change are high achieving places, because, it's like, we got 6 kids into the Ivy Leagues last year. Don't mess with us. And that's, the first thing is there's nothing wrong with, in fact, there's something very powerful about honoring fear, right? And owning that people will do strange things if they act from their places of fear. So when you take the time as facilitators of this, and when you take the time, there's got to be some therapy involved, right? To kind of make it funny, but you have to unpack why people are afraid of creation. You've got to ask people what their concerns are. It goes back to the question we always ask: what's the worst consequence of your best idea? Like, so okay, you're going to do this. What are you afraid of? What do you think might happen that you're not going to like, that you can't control, that you won't be able to, whatever? And then you have to ask the question of, like, what are you willing to live with? And what are you going to mitigate? What are the battles what are the new battlegrounds you got to fight? All of that, all of those are really important questions. And if you don't go through that process, and you're like, it's going to be great, bunnies and duckies, and yay! And then, like, when it's not perfect, because nothing ever is, people are going to retreat. And so you have to say, like, all right, let's problem solve before we even start. Let's start asking, let's go through the problems of saying like, what are we afraid of? What's going to happen? Oh my God, what's so scary? And owning it. And treating it as real. Not being like, not asking that question to dismiss, but asking that question to honor.
And I think you also have to, I'm sorry, Chris, you also have to be willing to take that risk, to explain, I am taking a risk, being really transparent with your own risk taking and what happens because it's, well, I thought that was going to be okay, but guess what? I probably need to make a change to that. Or we need, being really transparent that it is not easy, it is not simple, it is not quick, and that you are learning along with everybody else.
It's reminding me of my colleague Chad Sansing talks often about creating spaces of permission for other people to take risks and try something out, and thinking together as a community that and what I heard and what you said is that in that transparency, we're actually starting to create those spaces where other people can kind of also try it too, and it feels so important when we're trying to build these communities and build them as systems that and think about them together. We are starting to get close on time, so I just wanted to sort of maybe we could sort of all have some final thoughts that we want to take forward out of this conversation, and or thoughts that we want to take into next week's conversation, because we'll sort of we'll come back to this. And this has been great, and you know, our hour is up already. So anyone want to jump in there with some sort of final thoughts?
It's worth the risk. Look at the reasons why you want to make this kind of a change, and then understand that it's worth the truly small amount of pain it's going to take for you personally to get to a really big impact for students.
You know, a couple things. Number one, come to EDUCON. We're going to unpack all these ideas for 3 days. It's the last weekend in January. You can go to educon.org to register. Come to EDUCON, come to EDUCON, come to EDUCON. Jamie will be there. And better yet, not only will Jamie be there, but Jamie's sister will be there mocking Jamie, which is a great reason to come. More importantly, I think the thought I'm sort of consumed by these days is understanding asking questions isn't a half an hour PD. This can be slow learning. This can be book study. This can be understanding that smart people have been talking about these ideas for 100 years and know when and where they have been, and take the time to immerse yourself. I mean, sure, you know, here's one book, but like Schoolmaster of the Great City, Dewey, the Progressives, Debbie Meyer, there is a huge history of this stuff. And being a scholar of it will make you a better practitioner of it.
Well, and both studying the history of and never stop reading the brilliant minds of today and finding connections between them. Your own personal inquiry into your learning process and continuing to find new and different voices to add to and clarify and magnify the work that you're doing, so that you continue to find connections between the other people doing this work. I mean, this is how we've been stitched together. I mean, we're not people that geographically would have found each other in any other way than continuing to find connections and reading and asking more and deeper questions about our own practice. And so just a continued attention in all the systems that we work in. Who are you reading? What are you who are you reading? What is what is demanding your attention? And how can you continue to participate in that really robust conversation? There's a couple of books being shown right now, both of which I'm a big fan of, and not just because I'm mentioned in both of them, but because they're pretty lovely. But yeah, those are those are my my big final thoughts that I'll share whilst I laugh at Chris being ridiculous.
Awesome, awesome. Yes, and the books are both history and current educators writing about their work and practice, and we continue to bring those folks together too at educatorinnovator.org, which, you know, thank you for tuning in today, and encourage you to come back and sign up also, so you can further tap into these stories and comments. And we might have to blow up Chris's screen to be able to like actually read the titles of some of those, but we can post them in the with the archive of this discussion. There you go. Okay, so we'll list them out. We'll post them in the archive with the discussion, so you have access to all these resources that are being suggested. And I want to remind everybody to come back next Wednesday. We're doing a part 2 to this, Building School 2.0. 2.0 Part 2, Fostering Inquiry and Connected Practice in the Classroom. And a whole bunch of folks back with us to continue to this discussion, get a little deeper in, and we'll hear from some of the students who are working alongside the teachers on this stuff too. So I think that besides thanking all of you for being here today and for sharing your experience and your knowledge and your wisdom and how you've been leaning into this work, it's beautiful, and the resources you've been using to as you move forward. So thank you so much, and thank you for Leanna for behind the scenes, and we'll say goodnight now. Good night, everybody.